Right, according to Kettering, according to this email from Kettering, there are a number of issues that need resolved with regard to this project. So I began to look at those, and I was only able to get access to this email with what the actual remarks on why it was failing after I recorded some or most or all of this video. But they are the same sort of questions that I do raise in the video. I think we've addressed this attachment, they call it brick-based wall panel. I think we've addressed the attachment of those existing walls. On the right side, which is, I believe, the south side, that is, that's at the corner, so that's definitely fastened to at least two 2x4s, wall studs at that corner. This isn't how it's put together here, but this is just going to be all framing here, so that is going to be enough there. And here you have put in some cross pieces down low, and then you had to skip the part where the panel was, and you put some like GLK screws, big long screws up at that top, so that will probably be enough there. Next they mentioned this, and I didn't see that that was spliced, and Danny said it was the whole 33 feet, but that's actually going to be immaterial going forward. So that was one thing they questioned there. And then the next thing they questioned using these hurricane clips at that top, and that as long, yeah, they should have been different hangers, but or you didn't even need clips. I would say if you just make sure that you toenail those rafters with 216Ds, minimum 216Ds from each side, and this can be ignored. The next thing they have here is they want additional anchors. So apparently we did not have foundation anchors within 12 inches of end plates out there. Because I didn't have this letter when I came out there, I didn't review a lot of this stuff, and I'll probably have to make another trip out before I put together these final alteration plans. This though can be solved with using a Simpson anchor. We should be able to use a Simpson anchor to address whatever this issue is going to be, and that presumably that's just going to be, you're going to have an anchor within 12 inches of these ends, of all the ends of these walls. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 locations depending on what you have in place out there. Next, the last thing, or hopefully close to the last thing, and this was a question about how insulating that bolted ceiling doesn't match the approved plans, which they don't. So, and I think if you have that sprayed, as I talked about in the film, that will address that. And so that's it. We have to, because I don't know which plans they were looking at. We had ones showing rafters, but it still doesn't matter because we did not have any plans showing what's been built out there. So you will have to just forgive some of the repetition in the rest of this film, which was put together before I was even able to read this information here. Okay, according to Kettering, there were a number of issues. Most of these are solvable, and some they didn't even complain about. First of all, I guess they're going to want this changed because we went from this hipped roof to this, where we have this beam here and these rafters. It's important. The rafters pass, 2x4s would have passed, but we need that for the insulation, and according to the insulation people, at least the ones I spoke with, they can now spray that with whatever it takes to meet code, spray that ceiling. So we don't have to worry about the insulation, and that would be their ventilation. When you do that, there is no ventilation in that at all. That's all just closed. And that is very effective stuff. I know this from several experiences. But the secondary issue was, for me anyway, if I draw this like this, saying that this is good to go, it's not good to go, because this single LVL is not big enough to act as the beam down through here. So I investigated this project and recorded myself as I went, trying to find a solution to at least that issue there. Now remember, they haven't complained about it, they haven't said anything about that framing. According to John Davis, they didn't say anything about the framing. They said that was good to go, but it's just not, because that single member is not going to span 33 feet and hold up that roof load. So I began to investigate what could be done about this, and I recorded myself as I went, and this is really the results of that investigation and where I arrived at with it. And when you do go over to beam sizing program and size the rafters according to their span and the load on them, which is typical, 20 pounds live and 10 pounds dead, and I have put them in at 12 inches on center just so that you can see each one of them. So one on either side of that beam is carrying 128, so that's 256 pounds per lineal foot. And when I go to this, we're failing this because we have a 33-foot 1-inch span, and we are failing it pretty severely. First of all, we failed on bearing capacity, but even if we change that, we are failing on the moment and on all of these other categories. So yeah, even if we change that, to something required, to the minimum required, we are still going to be failing this on these critical, and this one pretty seriously. So we go back and put these in as actual, and all we're really going to be able to do on this just as a try, and I seriously don't think that's going to work. The earliest place we're going to be able to get bearing is going to be about 21 foot 8 inches, leaving us 11 foot 4. And then we go to that same report. Nothing really has changed except we've shortened that span. So I had a feeling that they wanted that one, but it still looks like it's going to fail, but they want a little more support in this middle one. So presumably we try to increase that to 5.5, but they want 8 inches anyway. And even if we did that, even if that was possible, and we increased this to what they're asking, which is 8 inches, you might even have to cut that floor out to do such a thing and put in a thicker concrete pad. But even if we do that, I think it has zero effect in terms of this moment that we are still failing. So that span is too far. So we have to come up with a different solution to make this thing meet code and not collapse. And as I was telling you on the phone, you could see this is from the residential code. And when they talk about a ridge board, it has to be at least 1 inch, which means 3/4 of an inch. But where the ceiling joists or rafter ties do not provide continuous ties, a ridge beam shall be provided and supported on each end by a wall or girder. And that's where we came into the issue with that. And just for fun, or just to find out in the future, with a building for this size, with those rafters, which those rafters are plenty well for that, but for the beam that's failing, and was failing even when I shortened its span, but if that was to be, well, even if it was to be 21 feet, we will say, I know it's going to take 2 of these regardless, and it might take, a larger size, and we'll see if it, so it passed 2 of these. If you would have just used 2 of those, you would have been good to go, and you would have had to support that here at the 21 foot 8 inch span. 2 LVLs would have done it. So if they want to keep that open, I'd say that's a pretty good size headache to remove the rafters you've got in here and put in another LVL, because 2 of those 11.25 will pass, and presumably they'll pass from the chart as well. So remember, our total load was 256, and now we're up to a 21 foot 8 span, but we're over here in this column with 2 of them, and they don't accept the results of that beam sizing program. They only accept these pages from the manufacturers, and it's a close call even using 211 and 7/8. We could probably get them to accept that, but I don't think you're interested in changing that out right now because it looks like it would be a headache. So the other alternatives, if you are not going to replace that, ridge board with a double, then the alternatives, there's not really something, you know, shown in the code to address this besides just putting ceiling joists at every one of your 2-foot on center rafters. They don't, you know, they're not going to show a spacing wider than 24 inches regardless of the species of the lumber. So because you have this big chunky 8-inch members coming down, I think we should try to draw a detail and send it over, and hopefully they'll accept it. I'm positive that it would be reliable in terms of the thing not collapsing, and if they do not accept it, then we would have to send it to an engineer, and that will be a $350 charge because it's so minimal. But that would be a $350 charge for the engineer to put a stamp on and say, yes, it will work. But since they have already not even raised a fuss about it, according to what you've said, they've not even raised a fuss about it, so they've missed the idea. But I can't show it on an updated drawing if it's going to fail. So I think we might be able to, the rafter slope is 412. Now this is how they want you to be connecting those ceiling joists to the rafters where they meet. You know, the rafter ceiling joist heel joint connections. And 16D common nails is what you want to be able, you want to use. And remember, the whole idea is to resist those rafters wanting to move outward at the base, collapse outward that way. So on a 412 and the rafter spacing, our rafter spacing is actually, I'm hoping to make our rafter spacing 6 foot on center, where we're only going to be tying together every 6 feet with some sort of cross ceiling joist. And presumably these figures here can be extrapolated or interpolated, because our roof span is, you know, our roof span is 16 feet. So if we use the 20 column and our rafter spacing is 24, they want 8. So I am going to suggest that we put in ceiling joists in pairs on either side of some of these rafters at 6 foot on center, and then we will put in where those cross over. We have all of this room here, and so we will put in from either side on the two, there will be ceiling joists sandwiching these rafters at 6 foot on center, and on either side where those things are crossing over, we will put in something in the neighborhood of 16 nails on each side, so that we can have that same resistance to thrust at 6 foot on center that they have at 2 foot on center by tripling or so the number of nails required. That is the best I think I'm going to be able to suggest as something that, for one thing, I think the chance of us getting a 20 pound per square foot snow load in this district is slim, but it's never none. But I have confidence that this would work if you put plenty of nails. You can see that 16Ds will fit in this space, even spaced a couple inches on center. Just litter this with nails to hold those and resist that thrust and solve the issue. You know, there are other ways to do it, and you know, and I don't want to get into the math, and they aren't going to accept it anyhow unless an engineer stamps it, so that might be the most expedient thing. But yeah, you could run these ceiling joists across here in pairs, say, and then you could have supports coming up from here to this beam, and possibly that might do the trick. But I want to make this, you know, less complicated rather than more complicated. And this couple little videos here will show you the general effect. At first I had thought I would run these as stained members, but I could tell just by looking at that that's going to be both a headache to accomplish and a headache to maintain, more than likely. So most likely the best thing is just to clad all of those those 3 pairs, clad them with drywall, and finish them and paint them like the ceiling. And they kind of, fade away, and at least the bird can land up there. So there is that. So those will finish at 5.5 wide by 6.5 high, and there will be about 17 inches from the top of the finished piece to that flat ceiling up at the top. So that's about it right now to convey to you. I'll make a trip out there tomorrow and have a conversation with you, or talk with John on the phone, see what your thoughts are on some of this anyway, but then get something put together that hopefully Kettering will accept and we can move forward. So that's it for now. I will talk to you soon. Thanks.